Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Funhouse, alongside in the co-captain's chair, as always, Mr. Martin Popoff.
Yeah, how's she going this morning? Has winter hit you yet? It's definitely cold here.
I think it was 27 this when I got up this morning. That's
Yeah,
pretty chilly. There was
yeah.
frost on the ground, and I noticed we have like a little a water bowl for the dogs outside on the back patio, and there was a little bit of water in there with like a couple leaves. Well, I went to go look at that this morning, and it was frozen over. The little stick of the leaf was hanging out. I went and pulled
Yeah,
on that. The whole ice thing came out. I was like, all right, got a nice little ice cube here.
man.
So
Yeah.
it's official. It's official. So, but yeah, I don't mind this weather at all. I'm ready for it. So bring it on. Bring it on.
All right.
I will say. Sorry about the results of the World Series, but you know what? The Jays have nothing to be ashamed about. That was,
I've taken it really hard. I think a lot of Toronto is too. It's just like the thousands and thousands of tons and pounds and just the weight of happiness that just flew out the window, right? That
yeah.
is
Well,
gone from the city, right? It's like, oh my God. I can't even watch any baseball coverage at all. I don't even know how I'm going to react to next year. It's just,
well, it sucks when you
it's
come
brutal.
so close, right? And it was such
Yeah.
a evenly matched series that, yeah. But you know, it's like we've said before, the smallest plays can have the biggest impact on the results of a series like that. So
Yeah.
it's like it was filled with all little things that swayed one way or the other. Because I mean, were there any blowouts in any of the games? I think maybe one, right?
Yeah, there was some blowout stuff going on, but yeah, at the end it was literally a game of just inches, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Was a
less
game of
than
chess,
inches.
right? A game of chess, Martin. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
And I'm so cynical about sports in that really you think they're going to be there next year? I mean, I always kind of argue that there's seven
okay.
or eight teams that can be there at any point at the end
Yeah,
of the
there's no
year, right? It's
guarantees.
like
Yeah.
why will it be them again at the end of the year? So hopefully I'll eat my words and they
Well, I
will
mean,
be
look at
there.
how few times it's happened. I mean, now they're all sitting, now everybody's saying, the Dodgers are the new dynasty. They won two in a row. They won three out of the last,
Yeah,
5 years or whatever. But there's no guarantees, right?
yeah,
Because right, the Jays made it this year. They may not sniff the playoffs for 3 years, right? And so there's no
exactly.
way of knowing.
Yeah.
It's a long season. A lot can happen, and yeah, that's why I don't invest in sports all that much. It's like it's basically baseball for me, and I don't get involved any more than that. I just can't do it.
That's interesting. Yeah. You've adapted by just paring down the number of sports that you'll
Yes,
be
yes. I
invested in
used
because
to
I
follow
I saw all that
football and
Mets pain, right?
hockey, and yeah, now it's
Yeah.
just like, and I'm a big boxing fan. I don't even get that much invested in boxing anymore because now it's like boxing, you don't know where to watch it anymore. It's on a million different streaming
Yeah. Yeah.
platforms that nobody fights anybody anymore. So I'm just like, yeah, I don't even get
Yeah.
that invested in that.
Ends in 30 seconds.
Ends in 30 seconds or ends in a ridiculous draw or bad decisions because
Yeah.
the judging is so terrible. So I really, baseball is really it for me for the most
Yeah.
part. And I'm a Met fan. We know how long it's been since the Mets won the World Series.
Yeah.
We won't
Yeah.
go there. Anyway,
All right.
so we've got the last installment of this kind of little series we've been doing, where we're trying to kind of get to the bottom of really where the first album, where a certain style or sound or genre kind of started. And this is an interesting one because you might be saying, "Well, Pete Martin, didn't you guys already do this episode like a couple weeks ago?" Well, yes and no, right? So we talked about what we felt was the first heavy metal album. But as Martin and I have talked about many times over the years, there's a little bit of a difference between heavy metal, certainly hard rock, and metal, right? Because there is this conception that metal is something completely different now, and there are bands and artists that took the heavy metal framework and did something a little different with it. So, Martin, I don't know if you want to expand on that. You've written books on this, so I'm sure you have, more to say about it. So,
Yeah, I've always liked this question, and I don't go metal, I go metal like this with the quote marks, right? Because and the funny thing is, as we see throughout here, there's it's ridiculous, but there's also the first heavy metal album and then the first heavy metal album. So heavy metal can mean our first choice just to kind of get things going here. I'll get to in a minute, but even the definition of heavy metal has morphed into something that now, if you're really in the club, it kind of means power metal in a way, right? It's got this authentic, this power metal thing because metal is a term that has been, it's the shortened term for something more extreme, but also because of the morphing, even of the term heavy metal and metal. And as the years go by and by and by, the older stuff gets more light sounding comparatively all the time, sort of thing. So that's why there are these cutoff points, and you'll see my answer. And it's really cool. We have two different answers in this episode, but you'll see my answer when we get to it.
Yeah, there's this
Um,
whole thing of like, and I hear it thrown about a lot, like true heavy metal. And true heavy metal, I think, has its roots in that underground US scene, which kind of became sort of power metal.
yeah,
So a lot of those kind of power metal bands now, they call them those true heavy metal bands because they harken back to that. That's different from metal. And it's
yeah.
funny, if you go on to like, if you go listen to like satellite radio like Sirius XM, right? They've got Ozzy's Boneyard. There's no metal or heavy metal in the title of that station, that channel.
Mhm.
And they play a mixture of hard rock, rock, heavy metal, and a few other things. But then you have to go to like liquid metal. And again, there's no heavy there. It's liquid metal, and that's where you get all the extreme stuff and all the really underground stuff. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's really interesting how the lines have blurred so much over the years.
Yeah, yeah.
Talk about this a
All
lot.
right, so we're going to go back and forth one at a time. So
Yep.
you will try to keep this moving, but I just wanted to establish again. So this was our answer. This is the given answer for first heavy metal album, and in this episode, we could posit the fact that if you don't think there's a difference between metal and heavy metal, maybe this is the first metal album for you as well. But it definitely has proper metal characteristics, I suppose. And if I was to put a fine line to it, maybe the only things that come out of this to give it to match what my answer, and but actually both of our answers are going to be about metal, is possibly the darkness of the themes more than anything. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, this was our first heavy metal album, and maybe some people might call this the first metal album. Like I say, if you don't see a difference in the terms. So that's my first choice.
Cool. All right, so we're going to go up 6 years now, right? So we have a lot of stuff in between, but I think for many people, uh, the first band or maybe the first album where the seeds of what we know as metal, the darker imagery, the big, huge, and sometimes faster riffs and those histrionic vocals maybe starts with Sad Wings of Destiny, March 26, 1976. You songs like Victim of Changes, The Ripper, Island of Domination, Genocide, Tyrant, I mean, classics on here. And while the band is not really doing the imagery yet, I think the sounds are here. So this is taking what they learned from Black Sabbath, they learned from Budgie and Led Zeppelin and Heap and Purple and whatnot, and arguably making it heavier, making it faster, making it more menacing, and then you have that voice on top of it all. So could this be, but then, you got some stuff on here. And again, one thing I do want to mention, because we talked about it, I think, on the last episode, whereas this kind of hint of bluesiness to the music, which is why I don't talk about rock and roll here, because it's fairly bluesy. Even that first Black Sabbath album, fairly bluesy. So does it become metal when the blues gets kind of cast aside, right, to more
Mhm.
metallic things? Don't know. So
Yeah.
maybe there's still a hint of this left here, not much, but the seeds are here already.
Yeah. And that album, what I usually say is that there's that whole 6 year period, things just got better, and here's some more, and here's some more, and here's some more heavy metal. But with that record, there was like an uptick in quality and complications. So
Yes.
I don't believe it's the first metal album, but I think the way it applies is that there's just this great added sort of intellectual heft to the guitar riffs if you can actually
Yeah.
have that sort of thing happening. So I think the thing that you will pull from that album to take forward into what's the first metal album is just the increased smartness of treating the genre of heavy metal.
And
Uh,
how metal is the cover, Martin? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and we'll get to that later because illustration is going to be part of this a little bit as well.
yes.
So, okay. So my next choice, and again, we are building up to what our answers are. Rainbow Rising, pretty important. And what I will pull from this to say as a candidate for first metal album is I remember this being the first album we bought as kids that had no mellow music on it whatsoever. Every single song on here, there's 6 songs. It's just heavy the entire way through. So there's no Child in Time. Even every Black Sabbath album has mellow music on it. Um, this had none, and that was sort of important. And then I think also um, this is a good candidate, I think, as we talked about last time, as the first heavy metal album of the later definition of the term heavy metal. So um, I don't think it's particularly. I think it's older sounding and more dated sounding than even the Priest album. So I'm not going to give the music all that much credit. The only credit I'm going to give it at this point is that there's no mellow music on it. So that's the reason for that.
Yeah, and I think here you have one of the first instances of a band, lyrically doing some really, really different stuff, right? You got these fantasy themed lyric and stuff that we would associate with metal going forward, but it's not overly dark or menacing, right? Dio's lyrics are a little bit different than that. So again, that's more of like an early heavy metal album, something that certainly influenced power metal and progressive metal going forward. But I think it deserves to be kind of in the conversation here, I think.
Yeah. All
All right,
right.
so from there, we are going to go stick with Priest once again. So here we have Sin After Sin. Certainly, I mean that album cover, right? That's kind of metal looking, and but again, not that much different than the previous album. So here you have these, darker, more complicated, very riffy songs. Dissonant Aggressors on here. Of course, you got Sinner on here. You've got, Starbreakers, and then you got the cover of Diamonds and Rust. So let's take like a folk song and just heavy it up a bit. Raw Deal. I mean, a lot of really great tracks on here. Some mellower pieces on here as well. But again, that whole idea, and I don't remember at the time. So they're still not looking the part yet, right? They're still here. They are. They're
Yeah.
looking kind of classy on here, Martin, I think, right? It's not quite where we would get really
Looking kind of country rock too. They look like the
yeah,
Oak
I
Ridge
would say
Boys.
that. They got that California thing going on there, right? But musically speaking, the band is advancing, of course, and I think what's coming around the corner is really where it actually happens. But definitely part of this equation here. So I won't spend too much time on that because we'll spend more time on the next one. But I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, and from that album, that I think where you start seeing some true metal, the truncated term is Dissident Aggressor and Call for the Priest Let Us Pray. The speed, the technicality, just the braininess, and also the something that's going to be part of metal later on, all the way up to today, is the insane progressiveness of it, and while being completely extreme, where that kind of thing maybe started with the likes of any Swedish melodic death metal or Meshuggah and stuff like that, and then moving up into your Lorna Shores and all this new stuff. So I think that starts with like your Dissident Aggressor and Let Us Pray. So next we have Stained Class, and the intensity improves here even more. And I've always thought that this album has a Child in Time on it and Beyond the Realms of Death, so it has some mellow music. They just had to soil this record with a tiny bit of mellow music. It's the only mellow music on the entire album, which is half of Beyond the Realms of Death. But the rest of it is very young, fast, and scientific, to quote the Dictators. And I think that's the sort of thing where that's the metalness of this album. You think of Exciter. Exciter's verse structure is not that particularly extreme, but the whole rest of it is. So there's very, very smart riffs on here, and some pretty extreme, smart, thoughtful metal, and it just seems even that much a little more committed than Sin After Sin.
Yeah, there's a metallicness about this record, which I know is a weird term to use because it's really hard to explain. But when you go through this album, there's something about it that just sounds like shit's just kicked up a couple of notches, right? And here you have some dark things lyrically, Saints in Hell, Beyond the Realms of Death, right? You're Savage. And the complexity of the riffs, the heft of the music, and Halford's vocals at this point in time are basically peak. This is to me, this is peak Halford right here. And the imagery with the chains and the leather and spikes is really kind of starts here going forward. Maybe you get that more on the next album as far as like, when you buy the album and what you see. But I think musically speaking, this is where it happens. This is where it happens right here. You got that red hot cover, right? Which is Better by You, Better Than Me. I mean, the Spooky Tooth song is great too, but this is even more kick-ass. But yeah, this is my vote right here for sure.
All right, so we're done. Check out History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. Go to my site for no. So yes, we talked before about this that this is Pete's answer, and it's actually John Gaffney's answer. And John Gaffney, a buddy of both of ours, has kind of he said that to me one day, and that really got me thinking more about this. So he is steadfast in his belief that this is the first metal album. But we're gonna move on through some other things here that bring other things into the situation, and then my answer comes later on.
Yep.
We added the band Gillan. This is the first Gillan album. Kind of an interesting one to put in here because what's interesting about this band is that it is Ian Gillan reaffirming himself in a heavy metal context, and the other albums are heavy as well. This whole catalog is heavy pretty much start to finish. I mean, there's some poppy and there's a lot of keyboards as well, but and it's very abrasive. So it's kind of interesting that you have one of the originals reasserting himself and kind of setting up the whole new wave of British heavy metal unwittingly, and he would never admit it. He probably has no clue that he did that.
Right, right.
But anyway, so that's the first Gillan album. That's the Japanese album. Mine's literally the Japanese version of this, right?
And let's keep track of the timeline here. So that's September 78. So we got Priest was February 78. That's September 78. So we're still really early on here.
Mhm.
Speaking of the timelines.
Oh, actually, I just took your entry there.
That's okay. Go ahead with the next one, Martin. Then
Well, okay, so I'll go with Motorhead, and then we'll be back on track. So, anything else you want to say about Gillan?
No, I mean I agree. I think it needs to be part of the discussion. They also kind of had the look too. They just, they looked like rough and tough guys. They were wearing the leather and just, they had the look. And I think you mentioned this whole thing about abrasiveness. There's a lot of that on these early Gillan albums. And, even though there was no real heavy metal term at the time, I think they're part of this for sure. And I absolutely think in a weird way, they really inspired this whole new wave of British heavy metal movement. I think them and Priest and the band we're going to talk about right now, it's huge inspirations to what came immediately afterwards, which we'll get to in a couple minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so next we have a pretty good candidate. I mean, you could put this up against your favorite Priest album, Stained Class or whatever. We're into 1979 now, March 1979. And the reason this is a good candidate is, again, it's another album that was start to finish no mellow music. I've often said, I've said that, along the way, also about AC/DC Let There Be Rock and the Sex Pistols album. And indeed the first Motorhead album, although it's a little bit more frumpy and dated. But what's interesting about this is you have, heavy metal illustration, check,
Yeah.
mascot, check, bullet belts and leather, check,
Yep.
Double bass drums, and double bass drums on Overkill as being known as the first song with double bass drums all the way through. You've got what I like to call recording badly on purpose, right? And that's something that has that carries right through with metal. And we've got a few later on that do that, but we know that happens in black metal. We know that happens in death metal. Not so much in thrash. Thrash, they're trying to record as well as possible, I think. And then even today's metal, they are trying to record as well as possible, but there's all sorts of crazy things that go on with trying to come up with insanely dirty guitar tones, or even things like the Saint Anger snare sound. which they've taken to the extreme where it sounds like you're literally hitting a tin can on some of these crazy metal sounds. So that's kind of trying to record snare drum as badly on purpose, right? So I think that kind of starts here. They are not going for the best fidelity they could go for. They're going for a biker rock sound to match what's going on, including Lemmy's vocals. Lemmy's vocal is not trying to sing like Rob Halford either.
No.
So there you go. That's the next choice, and actually a really good candidate.
How much stock do you put into this whole argument? Because I've heard it a million times over the years that, well, Lemmy always said that they weren't a metal band, that they're just a rock and roll band.
Yeah, I think that's kind of stupid. I mean, we could do a whole show on that probably,
I
but
know, right? It's just like
yeah,
I don't really I respect the man, love Lemmy,
yeah,
right? May he rest in peace. But I think it's a load of crap. I've
yeah.
always said Motorhead were a metal band, and people are like, well, but Lemmy said that they weren't. So it's like, well, they
Part of that psychology is he's so enamored and hypnotized and so enthralled and in love with having been there for the 50s and coming up with 50s music, which is literally, to use terms like we're doing here, that's literally called rock and roll,
yeah.
right? That music. So I think a lot of it has to do with that. And it's kind of a good way to think because it puts you outside of any boxes where you just think super generally about what you're doing. You're just this force. And I think kind of what he means, maybe subconsciously, is we go on stages, we have instruments and amps, we make records. We're a rock and roll band. Like we're literally, this is the business that we're in, kind of thing. So
Well,
part
every
of it's
one of
that
these
as
bands
well.
are at their core a rock and roll band, right? But
Yeah.
a rock band playing heavy metal is, that's not like the worst thing in the world. And Motorhead played and toured with tons and tons of metal bands of all different shapes and sizes. Those were their friends. I mean, they're part of that world. So people
Yeah.
like to argue. It's like there's no way that Motorhead is metal. It's like,
Yeah. It's like, I was scrolling through and I saw a TikTok the other day that was just Jerry Garcia talking about how rap isn't music. And it's kind of the same argument where you go, okay, yes. And he explains it well, of course. He says it's talking over beats and blah, 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 and all this. But the fact of the matter is, the same way Lemmy's saying we're part of the rock and roll business, rap people, they go up, they got microphones, they got amps, they go on tour, they make records. So in a lot of ways, it's music.
may not like it much, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a whole other can of worms. All right, so next up, so let's fast. So Motorhead was 1979. So let's go to early 1980 for a band and an album that absolutely is part of the metal equation, and that's the self-titled debut from
Yeah.
Iron Maiden. So here we got the imagery, we've got the leather, we've got the spikes, we've got the bullet belts, we've got songs about, Transylvania and Phantoms of the Opera and Charlotte the Harlot. So again, we do horror themes, dark themes, songs about prostitutes, dead prostitutes, Jack the Ripper, Prowlers at Midnight, all sorts of stuff. This absolutely is part of the equation. However, Priest for me and Sabbath kind of set the stage for this, but this is definitely one of the early instances of this thing called metal, I believe, right here. And you could talk about any of the subsequent Iron Maiden albums after that. So again, we're moving into now full on new wave of British heavy metal territory. Martin, any comments on Maiden before we kind of
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't consider it one of the first metal albums, but I think what it checks the boxes of is logo, Eddie, you're right, illustration, just that artwork was so direct, between the eyes. There's no more metal sort of artwork than that because it also brings in kind of a casual cartoony aspect, right? And
yes.
the live the live image on the back. And yeah, the lyrical themes, the titles, so all of that is part of when we talk about new wave of British heavy metal as like defining like just a complete ecosystem of heavy metal, where in the 70s we always talk about how, just like we talked about, Judas Priest looked like the Oak Ridge Boys or whatever, and Sabbath looks like the Eagles, and the Sabotage album cover just could be anybody's album cover, all that kind of stuff, right? So it has to do with that. Okay, so next choice. kind of in the same world is Saxon Wheels of Steel. I remember getting this as a new release and joining the militia guard, and the bikerness, the illustration again, the logo, the eagle, the wheel, Motorcycle Man 747, Wheels of Steel, Freeway Mad. So all of that has to do with metal. Even the name of the band, Saxon, was kind of cool. We got a logo again. And this has a little bit of that recording badly on purpose. Saxon, I feel like they were deliberately going for a halfways to Motorhead kind of production.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you get with these guys. So it's gritty. So yeah, this we're still moving ahead. We're not there's elements of there's slight elements of speed metal, very even less of thrash, but thrash, this is a band that's going to inspire a lot of the big thrash bands. So they're in here as an inspiration.
And that whole metallic nature, very much in the Saxon music, especially the early stuff. All right, sticking in the new wave of British heavy metal, December 1980, we got the self-titled debut from Angel Witch. Again, that dark, kind of really evil looking, like what's really going on there, right? Album cover. They had the look, right? You have the goat of Mendes there, right? So you got song titles like White Witch and Sorcerers and Gorgon and so on and so forth. Angel of Death. Imagery, lyrically, musically speaking, again, it's fast and furious, so elements of speed metal and doom and just, Sabbath and Priest kind of thrown together. Uh, some of the similar elements we got in the early Iron Maiden music kind of inherent in here. There's like maybe this tiny little bit of a punky vibe as well. So yeah, also part of the equation. Not one of the first though, but yeah, there's a lot of this going on. And again, we're trying to get to this whole idea of differentiating old school heavy metal with metal, modern metal, and all that sort of thing. And I think you can look at the new wave of British heavy metal. A lot of things going on there too. We didn't really touch on it too, but when we go back to the Maiden album, you have this idea of having the mascot of the band on the album covers. That's a huge part of metal going forward in the 40 plus years since
Mhm.
how many bands have that kind of mascot that shows
Yeah.
up everywhere. So
Yeah.
anyway,
And for Angel Witch, I would say that the music isn't quite there. But in terms of this specific argument, I would say that what you're looking at is death metal and black metal themes more than anything.
yep.
And the name of the band is pretty metal. Okay, so moving forward, still in this, but again, I don't think this is the true answer. Raven, Rock Until You Drop. You could have put Wiped Out in here as well. And the way they're contributing is extremity of speed and even chaos a little bit. But you almost get a band that had they had a different singer and different production values and just maybe rewired their heads a little bit differently, they could have been a thrash band. Um, but as it stands, they're one of the key contributors to the idea of speed metal. And I literally, in my definition of metal, speed metal is too early and it's not exactly metal yet. So yeah, Raven Rock Till You Drop, or Wiped Out, which is even a little more convincing.
Yep, yep. I don't know, Martin, if you have the next one, but kind of along the same lines as Raven, we're going to go with Anvil, Hard and Heavy from May
Yeah, no, I don't
19.
have that. I only have the following ones. I
Yeah,
know I
so
never owned the Lips album either. I don't even know if I've seen that in person. Even being here in Toronto, kind of weird. But as we know, it became, they redid the name and the artwork, and it became Hard and Heavy. So
yeah. Yeah, Anvil's kind of a similar thing to Raven, right? So you
yeah,
have this early kind of speed metal, very influential to the thrash movement. Not overly complicated music, though, kind of lumbering, heavy stuff, kind of speedy. Again, I think bands like Raven and Anvil, fairly influential to the whole thrash and extreme metal scene in its early infancies. Not really an answer here at all. Part of the discussion for sure. And that album cover, right, looks kind of metalish, right? They again, you
yeah.
talk about these like these themes that pop up on album covers. Anvil had the whole thing going on a lot of their early records. It became part of their kind of visual imagery. But yeah, part of the equation, not the answer though.
And again, I think the way that they contribute to the idea of metal is more anytime they were fast and anytime you've got Rob Reiner drumming with double bass drums and stuff. I've often said that that speed metal is thrash, except in speed metal the hi-hat's open and in thrash the hi-hat's closed. That kind of idea, right? Thrash is just everything locked down more, and Anvil is just an even better example of speed metal kind of thing.
Yeah, and I find a lot of the speed metal stuff, I mean, I love it, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of the thrash bands try to kick the complexity and the technicality of the riffs and the guitar solos up a bit. So there's
Mhm.
more emphasis on like the whole idea of virtuosity, whereas a lot of the speed metal bands, you don't really get that. It's just fast for fast sake. It's well done, well played. But I think there is that little bit of an artistic difference between speed metal and thrash, which really started to come out with the Bay Area scene, which we're
Yeah.
going to get to in a minute.
Okay, a little bit of show and tell here because my next example, I'll talk about this in a sec, but Venom, Welcome to Hell. Have you ever seen this thing? Have I ever showed this on the show? This is hilarious. It's a cassette box. I wrote a bunch of liner notes for this, and so it's called To Hell and Back, and you got this, you've got all these little folded up posters that come with it, like literally like six of them or so.
I'm sitting here
Um,
wondering if Chris Allo is watching, does he have this? Because I know he's an
oh
enormous
yeah,
fan. I would think this would be right up his alley if it's even still available.
big flag. Big
Wow.
fold out flag. It came with a pile of patches, um, little, I don't know, card, another big patch, big hardcover booklet. I think my liner notes are in here, but big, beautiful silver booklet. And then there's even stuff behind this. I won't take it out, but here's the rest of the box. And then there's more of the cassettes all in there.
Wow.
So it's just a full on cassette box.
All
Yeah,
still all
crazy.
still sealed. Look at that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not going to open the cassettes, that's
Well,
for
did you
sure.
even do you even know? I don't even own a cassette player anymore, so I wouldn't even be able to play any of that.
Yeah, mine busted down. Yeah, and there's the back of it.
That's now how metal looking is that
Yeah,
box?
exactly. But so the idea with Venom, of course, is that we've got a pile of the things here that apply, but I'm still not going to say it's the first metal album. But the boxes it checks is total extremity of vocal, total extremity of recording badly on purpose. They're the first. They're arguably the first thrash metal band, the first death metal band, the first black metal band. Just not a very good one in any of those departments, kind of thing, right? It's almost like they get lesser recognition because they kind of split the thing by being kind of proto in all these departments. But definitely, it would be hard. You'd be hard pressed to not call this metal. But again, I'm going to hold back and say this isn't. We're still not at the first metal album because I guess overlying this whole discussion is the idea that if you're a younger metalhead, you probably you could look back at something like Venom and saying that sounds like amateurish. It sounds like punk rock to me. It's boy, this is metal. Like listen to these metal albums from 2024 or 2023 that are insanely progressive, way more progressive than anything Rush ever did. And yet it's all in an extreme world and way heavier, five generations heavier than any of this stuff. So that's why I'm still saying this isn't the first metal because um I try to put myself in the heads of like young people when they go back and listen to this stuff because I hear it all the time about Black Sabbath and stuff and they say that's just weird old hippie music, like that's hard rock. Black Sabbath's a hard rock band, right? um so for that reason I'm still holding back and saying no, it's not the first metal album.
It's crazy to think if I go back in time to the first time I heard Venom, how crazy, extreme, and like frightening I thought that music was back then. And you listen to Venom today, it's pretty tame by comparison compared to what we've gotten since, and certainly what we got like a year or two or three later from those Venom albums, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like there are bands that up the ante. I mean, granted, they learned from them and went and kicked it up a couple notches, but yeah, it's definitely it's not as impactful, I think, as what we thought back then, but still a very, very important part of this whole thing we're talking about here today. So, and then so that, so again, we're talking 1981. So if we go up just a couple of years, so 83 is where a lot of things really started to happen here, 83 and 84. So also from Canada in 1983, June, as a matter of fact, we've got Heavy Metal Maniac by Exciter.
Yeah.
There's the metal even in the title of the album. I didn't have the hard copy to pull out, but also on there you've got the Marshall stack. You've got the hands, the arm with the studded bracelet and everything like that. All this really dark imagery. You got the knife, the bloody knife, and everything like that. So right there, and the music is pretty much speed metal, sort of thrashy. It's kind of extreme, the vocally and whatnot. So a part of this whole scene, but definitely there was stuff that came before, and I think the stuff that comes immediately after is where things really, really start to happen, which Mark will get to now.
Yeah, another example of it's almost like a darker, more underground example than Anvil and Raven of
Yep,
speed metal
yep.
is what you get there. Okay, so here's my answer. Here's the one that I always say is the first metal album. Um, Metallica Kill 'Em All, July 25th, 1983. And the reason I say this, and I think I've done a podcast episode on this as well. Maybe we even covered it on the Contrarians in one way, shape, or form. But I just always remember hearing this for the first time and thinking, that's a new level of angry vocal I've never heard before. Um, it's even a different kind of anger than a Venom like a Kronos or a Lemmy or anybody else, screaming hysterically or whatever. There's some sort of new edge to it that sounds, yeah, angrier rather than hysterical, I suppose. And the other thing was, on heavy metal albums previously, there was dynamics, there was peaks and valleys, and oh, here's the heaviest song on the album. Here's the apex of this record for riffs or whatever. Kill 'Em All was just like riffs all the time. The only dynamics you get on this album is when the rest of the band stops and maybe James is just playing on his own or something, right? So the only quietness is just by subtracting the rest of the instruments for a little build up. But generally speaking, there's definitely no mellow music on it. I think there's a little bit of arpeggiated, like a couple of little breakdowns or whatever. But the point is this is it's not speed metal because the hi-hat is closed. This is the first time where you get where you listen to it and you go, I cannot believe they can play that fast, that tightly. That's what everybody was saying about this band. It sounded like these guys are really skilled, which is ironic because Lars just learned how to play the drums and they're young and all that. And then finally, we do get that idea that I said before about how Thrash isn't trying to record badly on purpose. They're recording. This is a very high fidelity album
Oh
for an
yeah.
underground thrash album on a small budget, and just for being such an extreme metal band. So everything we talked about earlier sounded like a drunk version of Metallica. And this sounds like a sober version of Metallica, which I guess is ironic as well, because they definitely were known for their drinking. So I think with this record, and I just remember the day I heard it where I thought this is a new kind of music. That's kind of what went through our minds. This is a
Yes.
new kind of music, and we knew everything there was to know about heavy metal leading up to this point. I would have been 20 years old at this point, right? We're just crazy fanatics already. But I do remember us saying this is entirely new. There's something different about this. I personally, I've heard people, they disagree with me. I personally don't think there's any new wave of British heavy metal in this. Um, there's really not, in particular, like I say, it's so evolved past what we knew as speed metal, so that's not in here either. There's just really, there's an element of doom. So what I like about thrash, and I've said this before, is that a lot of thrash really sounds like Doom sped up. There's just so many aspects of Doom are in thrash. Just they're like 2.5 times the speed, sort of thing. Um, but yeah, so to me, out of everything we've talked about here, you can hear Kill 'Em All in all the metal that was to come later that we call metal and not heavy metal or any of these other subgenres, power metal, hair metal, whatever. So I think even right up until 2025, you can just kind of hear the spirit in which this album was made more in today's metal than any of the rest of it. So that is my answer. That's the first metal album.
Yeah, and I have my pick, but I totally understand your opinion on this one, and I can see it because you mentioned you hit the nail on the head. When this album came out, we all thought and said this is something completely new and different. To use a term that we weren't using back then, but it fits. If we were to call this modern sounding heavy metal and term it metal back then, it would be very, very applicable.
Yeah.
Because even listening to it today, it's a great production. The playing is flawless. This whole like art of precision, complex riffing, right?
Yeah.
Influenced
Mhm.
a ton of subgenres going forward. I was just thinking while you were talking, I was thinking like the whole like kind of Scandinavian melodic death metal scene, right? And certainly modern thrash and progressive metal and there because there's always been this little element of doominess to the riffing of Metallica, even more so on the next couple of albums. But because it's played so fast, we never call it doom. But if you break it down, you
Mm.
slow it down, you if you slow this down a couple notches here, all of a sudden this becomes one of the great doom albums. I think the only because we talked earlier about how this whole element of or aspect of eliminating the blues from the arrangements and from the music. You know, there ain't no blues going on here other than like, Kirk is doing some sped up pentatonics, because he's got that Schenker thing going on from time to time. Other than that, there's like the licks and the riffs and things like that. It's pretty far removed. The drumming,
Exactly. Yeah. This is the kind of thing where Ted Nugent would say, I don't like metal. It's too white for me, right? This sounds like white music kind of thing, right?
yeah.
And I also want to add that the black and red theme, is a metal thing. And we've seen that actually in some of our previous entries. And the name of the band sounds like the Encyclopedia of Metal.
Yeah.
It's like that name is like it's sticking a flag in the ground saying we're Metallica. We are the reference. We are the reference. Um, you know, full bookshelf in the old days when there were encyclopedias. We're the new reference for metal kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that idea of having no blues in it. Anybody who puts down Metallica, I've heard a few rock stars, of an older generation put down heavy metal and say it's too white for me, right? And that's when Ted starts going into all his rock and roll influences, and it's kind of what Lemmy would probably kind of think too. He'd say it doesn't have enough rock and roll in it for me, kind of thing. So
It was never meant to.
yeah,
There's
exactly.
even there's even not a lot of hints and flavors of some of the bands that we've already spoken about that came before them, right?
Yeah,
You know how they talk about how well they love Diamond Head and they loved, Deep Purple and all that kind of stuff. But like I don't hear like a lot of Zeppelin or Sabbath, or I don't really hear a lot of Priest in this music. It's just kind of like its own thing. It just stands on its own.
yeah.
And I
Last thing.
remember
Mhm.
how floored I was when I first heard this album. I didn't even know if I liked it. I was like, wow, this is
Yeah.
so different than everything I have ever listened to before. And then before you know it, a year later, they're my favorite band for most of the 80s. So.
That's a great point. And I absolutely felt that way as well. It's like I wasn't sure if it was my favorite band on this. They were the best band in the world by the time Ride the Lightning happened for sure. Like you listen to that, it's such a masterpiece, right? But the last point I want to add is I don't think if you took a metalhead of any age, I don't think any of them would deny that this is a metal album. And fair point. I mean, I don't think too many of them would deny even Iron Maiden as a metal album or whatever. A lot of these other ones, they wouldn't even know what they are. They'd say, I'm unfamiliar with that."
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think anybody would say this doesn't belong in the history of metal. They will go back this far to grab this album, but they may not go back to the 70s.
What's interesting over the years is how, yes, I agree with that 100%. I think the argument has popped up in recent years that those early Metallica albums that we always considered the great building blocks of thrash, now a lot of people don't consider them thrash albums at all. And I don't know whether that's because of all those years where Metallica wasn't playing anything remotely similar to it anymore. But a lot of people don't even count those albums as thrash albums anymore,
Yeah.
which kind of is hard to understand. But
It just boggles my mind about how mainstream and huge Metallica has become because I
and I think
never would have thought.
that's the reason why,
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah,
not
and
our underground beloved band anymore.
yeah. I just never would have thought in a million years they could be that big when listening to those old albums, right?
It just happened. But you
Yeah.
could kind of feel it coming. I remember by the time like Master of Puppets came out and seeing them on those tours, and they were just an absolute juggernaut. And I think, and I've heard more than a few people actually say this to me, where they've said, Metallica, I love them and they broke my heart. And now their opinion of even all the greatness from the 80s has kind of like been
Mm-hmm.
minimalized and marginalized because of how the direction changed so completely for so many years. And people just will never forget that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. All right. You've got
So,
one more.
so we got one more to kind of throw into the equation here because I think that the importance of this band as well from a lyrical perspective, from an extreme perspective, from every kind of imagery you can possibly imagine, the albums themselves, and maybe not specifically this album, but it is the first one. So it's also in 1983, and that's Show No Mercy by Slayer. Maybe we could look at Hell Awaits or certainly Rain and Blood as one of the most important albums to extreme metal going forward from there into the 90s, into the 2000s and whatnot. But here you have this whole concept of the really evil nature of metal, right? I'll use Martin's quotes here instead of my fist, right? So, but yeah, this whole idea of satanic imagery and lyrically, horror movie themes and just as extreme as you can possibly get. So, we look at Slayer and we look at kind of who we talked about before in Venom. I always felt that, what Venom was doing was kind of shocking at the time, but, going back, you look back on it, it's like, okay, well, now what we know now later, it's been marginalized a little bit. But I think once Slayer hit the scene and kind of took off running, if not with this one, certainly with Hell Awaits, if I wasn't kind of like a little frightened by what I was hearing from Venom, as soon as I heard Hell Awaits, the opening title track, I was kind of like, oh shit, the game has just changed forever, right? And
Yeah.
I think we know that going forward with Slayer. So yeah, so also part of this discussion, again, it depends on where you sit. What I'd be interested to see is like for folks watching, how you feel about this whole thing, like where, again, we're looking to separate heavy metal and metal a little bit because there is a little bit of a difference because we've got so many subgenres and things like that, and people look at this style of music differently today. What people think, do you think that the whole kill 'em all argument is pretty valid? Do you think staying class is valid? Do you still go back all the way to Black Sabbath, or do you look at something even more modern than what we're talking about here today? So we've kind of come up with a lot of participants in this whole discussion. There's obviously other ones, but I can't argue Martin's at all because I think this whole idea of being completely new and doing something completely new is very, very valid. Do we get that without a stained class? I don't know. So,
Yeah, and just quickly on the Slayer, I mean, I just always felt that the riffs aren't quite as disciplined and staccato and chuggy. They're a little more smeary, and same with I think the hi hats a little more open, the drums are a little more wet, the bass drums a little more bulbous. So it's just lacking the bite of the Metallica album.
the soloing is not as virtuoso and precise. I know a lot of people are like, Kirk Hammett is not a virtuoso. Well, that's an argument for someone else.
Yeah,
I'm not going to go there. But you listen to the chaotic soloing of Slayer versus Metallica. It's very different, very different.
yeah.
You can throw any of the other thrash bands in there. I think, Slayer does what they do very, very well, but that's their thing.
And if you're a kid and you're into today's extremely progressive, insane metalcore metal, Metallica maybe was not extreme enough for you, and Slayer was the more extreme version. So maybe you will
Correct.
pick a Slayer album as the first metal album.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I get that whole, yeah, that's 100% correct. Because every time I talk to Count Ralphus from Hudson Valley Squares, he always talks about how he was listening to a lot of the early hard rock and metal bands. But like once, like he started listening to Megadeth and Slayer and Metallica and Anthrax and Overkill and Creator and Destruction and Sodom, that led him directly into Death and Morbid Angel and Obituary and Possessed and everything else that came, and he never looked back. Never looked back.
Yeah.
To a lot of
Well,
people, that's metal.
yeah.
That's
Scream
metal.
bloody gore, right? It could be, if so I guess the point of this whole thing is that how far back will a young kid go to
Yeah,
to pick the first metal album?
yeah. And is metal without the heavy? Is metal? Does it have to be extreme?
Hmm.
And what makes it extreme? Because that's probably true to a lot of people. Metal is what we consider extreme metal. Heavy metal is hard rock and other things.
Yeah, yeah. All
So,
right,
all right.
done.
I think we solved that one, Martin.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah.
All right. What's new? What's new on your end with the podcast and the Contrarians and books? You got anything new coming out?
Yeah, so the audio podcast every single week is History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. Contrarians, we've been doing various shows. I've been doing these short reviews of things like Don't Start Too Late and Super Czar for the 50th anniversary of Sabotage. Probably continue with that. And then the books, we've got The Big Maiden, The Big Dio, The Big Deep Purple are brand new out, and the updates of White Snake, Scorpions, Max Webster, Merciful Fate, all that. And that's all at martinpopoff.com.
Did you see the photograph of Kenny Kessler getting Steve Morse to sign the Deep Purple book?
Yes, I did. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was great to see. Yeah, I always that happens a lot where people get my book signed by these guys, and I think that's kind of strange because they didn't write the book. To me, it's all this is a whole story, but I'm a big autograph guy, as you probably know. But I hate that idea of getting pick guards signed. I see people getting pick guards signed by lead vocalists and drummers, or the whole band signing a drum skin and stuff. To me, the thing you want to get signed is the work by that artist. And that's why, to me, that CD cover, that record cover is their thing. I don't care about getting any part of their instruments signed guitars, all that. I think that's stupid, right? But to me, you get the work signed. So it's weird when someone takes a book. And then the other thing with books is that you wonder, okay, how's this guy going to react to this guy bringing a book, right?
Yeah.
On us. And are they going to get mad? Oh, that Martin Popoff wrote a book on us. Screw him, right? And so it's kind of casts a pall over the thing. So I recommend everybody don't take my books to get signed by these people. Take their work to them. Take the thing that they did, and it's just a better, easier thing. You can frame it.
And
You can
maybe
do
he
all
did.
that
I
stuff
don't know.
with
I
it.
just saw the picture with Steve with that big gigantic book, and
Yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to, I've spoken to Steve a few times. I'm just thinking Steve's reaction. It's like, oh, he's because he's so like soft spoken. Way he's, oh, huh, wow, oh, that's big,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
struggling to find out what to say.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh my God, I didn't know this existed. Like what? Oh, geez.
Am I in
What?
any of the
And he
chapters
picks
of
it
this
up,
book?
flips
Yeah.
through it. It's standing. Kenny's looking at his watch. Steve's reading it. Yeah.
Oh, too funny. All right, so that's a wrap for this episode of Friday Morning at the Funhouse. Tune in. We've got a busy day here on the channel today. We've got, of course, Ken Golden's coming in for Professor's Picks later this afternoon, so 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We've got 4 Fusion Friday tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're doing a show all about the great Jean-Luc Ponty, the great fusion violinist, so that's coming up tonight. Tomorrow we've got 2 album homework assignment episodes. We've got Ryan Scow and Karen LaPreziosa in one, and the Bray Dogs, Simon Bray and George Lemie in the other. And then I will be joined by Grant Arthur for 2 ranking the album shows on Sunday. We've got Piper featuring, of course, the great Billy Squire. We've got Jafria featuring, of course, the great Greg Jafria from Angel and House of Lords. And then Sunday evening, Mr. Rich Catino will be joining me for another episode of New Wave of Traditional Heavy Metal Primer. If you haven't heard already, we're going to be talking about the brand new Ambush. We're going to be talking about the brand new Void and the brand new Wings of Steel. If you haven't heard these albums, especially this one, go check them out. Or check out the show first, then go check them out, and we'll see you then. And Martin and I will be back in 2 weeks here at the Funhouse. So visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram all the damn time. Is it Metallica? Is it Stained Class? Where's my Stained Class, Martin? Where is it? Where is it? There it is, right
I
here.
got one here too. Yeah, here we go.
Which is the first metal album? Or if you think it's something else, let us know down in the comments below, and we'll see you next time. For Martin, I am Pete. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.